Hello, everyone. How many people here remember when none of these buildings over here were in San Francisco? That is wild. This is like a really interesting view of the development of the city with the Salesforce Tower over there. Obviously, there's been a ton of money flowing through San Francisco, and I think sometimes people forget that this is the home of biotech, one of the leading hubs in the country, and I'm so glad that we can all be here together to talk about that ecosystem. We're going to talk about geography in just a second, but I also want to give people a chance just to kind of hear a little bit from each of you. Reg, can you just describe for the audience, for anyone who doesn't know, what Qv3 does?
Okay, so I'm a professor still at UCSF, and my job is to try and capture the innovations that come through the University of UCSF, but also the other campuses of the University of California, and try to translate them as efficiently as possible into the private sector so that they can improve human health.
Okay. Sara, could you describe the role in the biotech ecosystem here in the state for California Life Sciences Association?
Sure. So California Life Sciences Association is the statewide trade association for the life sciences in California, and we offer services in two broad areas. One is advocacy, so we have an office in Washington, D.C., and also in Sacramento, and we lobby for a business, regulatory, legislative climate that supports innovation in the life sciences. And we also provide business development assistance to life sciences companies and entrepreneurs, so networking, advising, partnering, and educational seminars.
Cool. And Barry, tell me a little bit more about being the head of business development at a university. Is this something that many universities have at this point? And is it primarily focused in life sciences?
Well, UCSF is a life science-focused campus. Doesn't have an undergraduate school. It doesn't have engineering and other disciplines like that. So yeah, it's exclusively focused on life sciences, therapeutics, as well as medical devices, as well as digital health technologies. Most universities have people involved in business development, if you will. That is protecting intellectual property, protecting inventions by faculty members, and then either licensing those to other companies or using them as the basis of startup companies. I think what differentiates UCSF from others is that the university has made a huge commitment in terms of creating a new activity, a new role within the university that I occupy that not only oversees business development, but also innovation and the fostering of ideas to proof of concept. So our goal...
Does that mean you're raising money to do that support?
Exactly right. So that's a little different from what's been done in the past. There's a so-called valley of death that most people are familiar with, the university inventors face, where the university inventor has sufficient funds frequently to identify an interesting target or maybe a hit molecule, but they don't have the funds to mature that to a clinical lead or let alone get it into the clinic. And that's the so-called valley of death. So we're raising a fund by which we can invest in those most promising projects to shepherd them through the valley of death and get them to a point where that we have some sort of proof of concept which can form the basis of either a new company or much more lucrative license agreement with an acquiring company.
So let's talk a little bit about the development of San Francisco as a biotech hub. I mean, I've been all over the country. I don't know how many of you have done this, and you see all these cities and regions trying to develop into hubs of various kinds, right? They want to become a tech hub, a biotech hub, an agri-sciences hub, whatever it is. And no one seems to be able to duplicate what's going on here. There's been obviously a lot of historical research on the tech side as well as the biotech side into why it is that this place came into being. But from your perspectives and looking back on your careers, what would you say? What's made San Francisco one of the two preeminent biotech hubs, if not number one?
Well, first of all, thank you for saying that we are in fact the top hub, because I hear say that there
I'm
are
a
some
homer.
people.
I live in
Some people think that Massachusetts is a rival. Here in the Bay Area, we do think that we have really achieved that first-ranked spot in the world for a number of reasons. First of all, Birthplace of Biotech, January 1976, when Swanson went down to see Boyer and had what is now, I think, sort of considered the iconic beginning of biotech conversation, which led to the founding of Genentech. So that was the genius of a few people coming together and really envisioning something new happening in this area. But of course, the area itself was ripe to exploit that kind of innovative thinking because of the confluence of the stellar academic institutions. You had established companies, and you also had what I think is very hard to define, but critical in any innovation hub, and that is the entrepreneurial spirit. So really the willingness to take big, big risks on processes that are long, complicated, and expensive. You have to have a body of people willing to do that with venture capital, willing to fund them in order to make a hub like this as extraordinary as it is.
It's amazing. You can go back and read like Mark Twain on the sort of like spirit of San Francisco, and every time I read it, I'm just like, what is this nonsense? Come on, we're not being influenced by the people who came here in 1848. And then you look at it and you think, wait, biotech hub, 3 of the 6 largest companies in the world. It's an amazing thing.
I think it's the juxtaposition of venture capital to innovation. And, you know, obviously it helps to have bright, innovative people coming out of UCSF, Stanford, UC Santa Cruz, and the like. But venture capitalists, by and large, don't like to get on planes. They like to be able to get in the car and drive 30, 45 minutes for a board meeting. And I don't know if Reg did this by design or it's more convergent evolution, but when he and Doug Crawford set up Qv3 at UCSF, he ended up integrating all of those components into his Qv3 model. Great inventor innovation with venture capital, as well as a place for inventors to incubate their ideas.
Yes. To put one other idea onto this, it's been well known for a long time that many of the companies, the IT companies in the Bay Area, are started by Chinese or Indian people. That's been well established. We actually looked through about the 400 companies we've helped get started in the life sciences space and asked how many of them were led by immigrants. It turned out it was 52%. So that number is true both in the life sciences and the IT space. And I think one of the big advantages we have in this place, having a very cosmopolitan culture, it turns out, you know, immigrants tend to be very likely to become innovators. And so, for example, when I talk to colleagues from China who are trying to do this in China, I said, you've had it. You're not going to get immigrants in China the same ways we get them into the Bay Area.
That's interesting. Let's talk about Boston versus San Francisco. This seems to be, give me the best case for Boston, Sara.
Oh, no.
Give me the, yeah, what would they say?
I'm president and CEO of the California Life Sciences
Oh, I know.
Association.
Yeah, best case for Boston.
Well, so we see many lists because when you think about life sciences sort of robustness, you can talk about number of companies, you can talk about number of patents filed, number of deals done, and so, you know, I see lists where Massachusetts does come out ahead on certain things. I would call out one thing, though, that I think everybody in the Bay Area envies, and that is the sort of concentration of great companies, great private research institutions, philanthropic organizations, et cetera, around Kendall Square. So one thing we love the fact that the Bay Area has wonderful companies dotted around, but it can be hard to get around the Bay Area. And so the one thing I would say for Massachusetts, and it's really the only thing I'm going to say for Massachusetts, I have to ask someone else, is just that intensity in that space, I think, is really wonderful. And anybody who's been to Kendall Square and had coffee and seen people wander through, you know, and just chit-chat with one another, that is a wonderful thing.
It's like Stacks in Burlingame. go to Stacks in Burlingame on any weekday
See,
morning.
I mean, even that, we're
There'll be
better.
half a dozen venture capitalists in there trying to do a deal.
Yeah.
Reg, what about you?
Yeah, well, I think, since currently, more NIH money goes into the Boston area than comes in here. So for driving life sciences, they have the advantage. A larger fraction of their money is coming from NIH. So we're getting more money into the Bay Area, but a large part of it is coming into the IT space as well as the, so just the fraction of our income is coming from NIH is smaller here.
It's interesting. I mean, the more interesting battle seems to be between Boston and San Francisco as these sort of clusters versus everybody else. I was looking at some interesting numbers in Forbes, which showed those two hubs kind of distancing themselves from the next tier of life sciences hubs. If you were to think about what those other places could do to sort of keep pace, what would it be? Like if your research triangle in North Carolina.
Yeah. Well, a supportive legislative environment is extremely important. Here in California, while the Bay Area was kind of the beginning, we do have extraordinary hubs across the state, and they can really help one another in terms of thinking about how do you build a life sciences hub at the local level, when you think about traffic and zoning, at the state level, think about taxes and job creation and funding for science, and then at the federal level, you've got FDA and you've got CMS, and so that whole body of legislative and regulatory requirements and incentives is incredibly important. In California, I think we're almost becoming the victims of our success. We really, really need to work very closely with and this is part of our mission, with our representatives to make sure we're maintaining that edge. And what we see is that, North Carolina and Texas and Kentucky and Arizona and, the states are really waking up to the fact that jobs in the life sciences sector are great jobs, they're well-paying, they're clean jobs, they foster indirect jobs, and they are coming up with incentives. So
let me ask you, I feel like when I was coming up, I was first writing about these topics, 10 years ago, it felt like San Diego was still, kind of, if not number one, and kind of like 1A. What's been happening in San Diego, and what would you say about that hub? Or anybody else, Reg?
Yeah, I think it's excellent. I really love UCSD in particular. I think it's, again, as Barry was saying earlier, the lack of venture capital. So when we run contests, as I do for all of the University of California, in the life sciences areas, the San Diego companies really are eager to come and pitch up here because this is where most of the angel and venture investment is. And I think, as Barry said earlier, that actually is pretty well key, and San Diego doesn't have that.
That's
Yes.
absolute. Oh, sorry.
So I just wanted to share kind of a hypothesis in thinking about this. Maybe it's overreaching, and you can correct me if I am. But when I think back on Cambridge, when did Cambridge and Kendall Square begin to transform and flourish and become a hub? It was kind of simultaneous with Mark Levin selling Millennium to Takeda and then forming Third Rock Ventures. Third Rock really kind of turned the venture model at that point in time on its head. It was making huge Series A bets. It was not uncommon for Third Rock to invest $40 to $50 million by themselves in a Series A company. That was simultaneous, in my view, with kind of the ascension of Cambridge as a hub. In San Diego, conversely, you've always had groups, Forward Ventures, Domain, Avalon, a couple of others that I can't name right off the top of my head. But to me, the turning point is an unfortunate one. Jeff Solander, who was a very charismatic, outgoing guy at Forward Ventures, he was a real spark, and he was involved in starting a lot of creative companies. He was unfortunately killed in a car accident when he was driving his Ferrari at an unsafe speed. And if you look back in time, it's almost as if that event was simultaneous with San Diego losing some momentum in the biotech space.
I mean, it's interesting. I mean, there's obviously a lot of historical debate about these kinds of contingencies, right? Could one person actually have made that much of a difference?
Perhaps at the beginning, it's really true. What Reg said did bring to mind one other thing about creating a life sciences hub, which is I think it can be very successful to pick something and really go with it. And so something that San Diego has really built up is a kind of a nexus of companies around genomics. So for a hub that is up and coming, or really in the case of San Diego, pretty well established, what you can do is to identify specific areas and really lead the pack in those areas.
So in this area too, right, everybody is talking about artificial intelligence, machine learning, deep learning, and a lot of these things are being applied sort of liberally across different domains. Do you think that changes the sort of regional picture, San Francisco versus Boston, because of the amount of AI and machine learning development that's happening here?
Well, there are some really good things. There's some partnerships going on between UCSF and Google, which I'm not allowed to talk about, but they are.
Feel free, though, if you need to.
Yeah, but one of the things that works well when you've got massive amounts of data, right? That's when machine learning comes very useful, and so that's what they're using it for. But when it comes to sort of many of the things that we're involved with, it's sort of artificial. I'm not so convinced artificial intelligence has a whole lot to contribute. Like when you, what are our problems right now? Our problems are, for using the best of our molecular biology, but only 1 in every maybe 10 of the things that get up through IND ever get into clinical trials, using the best of our molecular biology. And why is that? It's because our molecular biology sucks on this thing. It's not good enough yet. And the whole drug development thing is still basically an empirical thing. And the trouble is that you need to we're detecting each individual molecule as a target, and it's a system that works here. So what one needs to do is to think of biological things as a system and develop a way of taking our data, converting it into a circuit diagram of the cell. And artificial intelligence at this present format isn't doing that, to my knowledge. And so it isn't really addressing what, for me, is the major problem in the pharmaceutical industry, and we just haven't turned it out to being an empirical science. You might think that's a little hard, Barry.
No, I think it's a good point, Reg. I think we work with a number of companies in addition to Google, and some of those programs are focused on really trying to create predictive computational models for different aspects of the drug discovery development paradigm. And the problem is, you're right, it's not just that molecular biology sucks. We don't have an adequate understanding of some of the basic fundamental, like quantum chemical aspects of drug metabolism. Most metabolizing enzymes, your cytochrome P450s, the major one, 3A4, it metabolizes 40 to 45% of all xenobiotics it comes in contact with. It's an enzyme, and yet how can it be so promiscuous? It's because it doesn't interact with substrates in a typical enzyme substrate fashion. It's more akin to solution chemistry. We don't really have an adequate way of modeling that. So we'd love to. We'd love to be able to model that and build in predictive algorithms that would allow you to look at a virtual structure of a drug candidate and predict how quickly it will be metabolized and by which enzymes. We don't have the science yet with which to do that. So there's a technical gap that needs to be overcome.
There's another area that I'd love to see people getting involved with. Every drug is designed, go through very careful clinical trials, pharmacokinetics, and so on. But then it gets out into patients, and most patients are taking 5 or 10 different drugs, and that combination of drugs has never been tested, right? So this is now we're thinking of patients out there as being the test thing. Can we use artificial intelligence to look at inadvertent drug interactions by looking at massive databases? That's a very good way of trying to use artificial intelligence.
How else do you think the IT industry, that version of tech, should be interacting with the biotech world? Obviously, you have a series of things coming out of Google and Amazon. Well, Amazon recently, Chrissy Farr, she's here with 1492, and all of these traditional tech companies seem like they're extending a pseudopod towards the life sciences. how would you like to see them come into this world?
I think these two are right, that we have yet to really see how AI is going to help drug development. On the delivery side, on the clinical side, I think there's immense potential for improving healthcare delivery, and as I think Reg was getting at in his last remark, really thinking about how to optimize and perfect patients' interactions when it comes to, understand drug interactions better and make their experience of treatment much more efficient. So I think that's probably where it ends up. And you think about companies like Verily, and we're going to hear from Rob Califf later, Google, Facebook. That's where they have immense amounts of data that could really be transformational.
Yeah, let me just add one refinement. And it's important to distinguish between applying AI and machine learning to the drug discovery clinical development process, what Reg and I were alluding to earlier. It's quite a different situation when you're talking about digital health and clinical data, okay? And so there is a big push. Bob Wachter, who's the chairman of the Department of Medicine, is known within the community as the quote-unquote digital doctor. He's written extensively on digital health technologies. Mike Blum, as well as Atul Butte, who are both on the faculty at UCSF, are also highly focused in digital health with a real emphasis on how to apply machine learning to improve clinical outcomes of patients, either in clinical trials or who are just living their life taking 5, 6, 7 different medications.
But unfortunately, a lot of the precision medicine thing is aimed at improved diagnosis, and I think we're certainly going to the direction we're going to be able to tell long in advance of showing symptoms. We'll know whether you're going to get sick. The trouble is, if you know you're going to get sick and there's nothing you can do about it, it's not very advantageous. So for example, knowing I was going to get Alzheimer's in 5 years doesn't do me any good because there's nothing I can do about it, right? So this is where I think that we're getting lots of IT coming into diagnostics, but where we really, really need the help is in trying to develop the therapeutics.
That's interesting. We touched a little bit on regulation and the state, but what about the federal level? Has the new administration changed anything for you all?
Has the new administration done anything?
So we do have a new commissioner, Dr. Gottlieb, and he has long experience on a number of fronts at the FDA, at CMS, very politically astute, has been in the investment world. So he's bringing a lot of different kinds of experience. And I think his track record, even in the short time he's been at the agency, has been very helpful. Trying to identify specific initiatives. So for example, speeding the approval of generic drugs, implementing the 21st Century Cures Act, making sure that the hiring that was authorized is happening. So all of those things, I think, are very positive.
Do any of you hope or expect that there'll be a major reform to the FDA in the next 10 years, say?
I don't expect a major reform. I mean, recall that the major remit of the FDA is to safeguard patients. So their primary focus is on patient safety. And there's a minimum amount of work that you have to do in order to demonstrate that a drug is safe. Now, if it's efficacious, that's icing on the cake, I think, as far as the FDA is concerned. But I would have a hard time envisioning major reforms at the agency.
You know, I've heard people say it's not actually, excuse me, the FDA that's the problem. It's really the reimbursement strategy. That's actually more of a challenge to startup companies, to knowing what the government policy will be, because essentially the government sets the price of any development, of any drug, and trying to get a more intelligent reimbursement or more predictable reimbursement policy would probably be more advantageous than any alterations in the FDA.
That's great. We have some time for questions. We have about 5 minutes. We've got mic runners. Let's go right here.
Sir, you'll stand and introduce yourself. I'll hold the microphone.
Hi, my name is Dan Lappin, and I'm an innovation creativity consultant to the industry. So my question, Regis, is for you. You've mentioned creating circuitry, taking data and making a map, and then you talked about IT. It's not about diagnostic, about how we do therapy. Okay? So the bigger question is, as we sit here in the life cycle of biology, is there this shift between our concepts of cognition and neuroscience versus systems biology, where there's the bigger map and it's a connection, and that's the real value there? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm with Scottson, very much more pragmatic, right? I think the challenge right now is not to come up with any particularly fancy algorithm, but to actually address what really takes place in the biological systems. It's not a gene product that does anything, right? It's a protein machine that's assembled from 10 or 20 different gene products. And what we've not done nearly as well currently is understand how many protein machines there are in a cell and how they function. So a way that I think, which is going to be a big improvement in technology in the next 10 years, is in focus more on proteomics, how the peptides and the gene products assemble into a machine and how they will work. When we can do that, then we'll be able to make the sort of breakthroughs conceptually that we need to do drug design. I think we have to move away from the focus on genes right now and focus on protein machines.
There's another question right there.
Sorry.
Here we go. We'll go right here next.
Me first?
You first.
Okay, hey, my name is Sri Kamandan. I work at a company called Crescendo Bioscience. It's a lab diagnostic company. And I thought your question about reimbursement was interesting because I'm an ops manager there, so we see this every day, the challenges with reimbursement that you see when you actually try to make a kind of actual healthcare product and try to make basically make money off it, right? And have success. So have you heard of any innovative or interesting solutions for the government or private sector around reimbursement strategy and how we could solve this challenge of payer reimbursement as we are still in a private insurance market?
I wish I could say yes, but I haven't heard any good thinking coming up. Perhaps someone in the audience, or Barry, have you heard of?
I've heard nothing in that regard.
I think the overriding characteristic right now is uncertainty. Clearly, the situation with the future of the Affordable Care Act is really what has been governing debate ever since the election. That landscape is becoming clearer. I think that, go ahead and make a prediction. I don't think there will be a root and branch repeal of the ACA. I never thought that was possible. I don't see how it's possible now. But there's a lot of tweaks, some great and some not so great, and I think the discussion moves to some really important questions about the extent of Medicaid funding. Will Medicaid funding be block granted? Will eligibility for Medicare be expanded or diminished? In terms of the role of the private insurers, obviously the private insurers have suffered from their profits have not suffered, but their business planning honestly has suffered from the fact that there's just no predictability right now with regard to cost-sharing subsidies and the risk payments and so forth. And so I took the easy way out in answer to your question by focusing on regulatory, because honestly it is very hard right now to answer your question until we have a more stable framework within which we can all work. Then I think we can start profitably thinking about, okay, what's the answer?
Let's go quickly here. We got to go quick, so we have about 30 seconds.
My name is Shelley Gordon, and my company is G2 Communications. We're a healthcare marketing company. And I wanted to address something you said about algorithms as they apply to clinical trials, and then you said if we, we can predict that I'll have Alzheimer's in 5 years, what good is it because there's nothing to treat it? But what about early detection for cancers? I'd love to hear your perspective on that. Lung cancer, you don't find out about it until it's stage 4. Ovarian cancer, you don't find out about it until it's stage 4. How can algorithms help with early diagnostics?
Yes. That's your area, Barry.
Yeah, well, I think with respect to oncology, early detection is obviously optimal, but where the folks at UCSF who are developing these technologies are moving is towards predicting more acute situations, cardiac events, for example. There's a program underway called the Healthy Heart Trial, in which thousands of volunteers are wearing Fitbits and monitoring heartbeat and pulse rates, and the ultimate goal is to try to correlate kind of lifestyle as measured with a Fitbit with incidents of heart events, and then ultimately develop a predictive tool that will tell someone, listen, you keep this up, you're at increased risk for heart attack.
Thank you so much, panelists, and we'll be off the stage. Thank you.